Welcome back to Virtual Selling, an educational web series from Sparks IQ. This is episode 2, where we dig into front stage selling. In our previous episode, we introduced the idea of orchestration in sales and talked about how mastering virtual is vital. Today, we're going to discuss the advantages of virtual selling and dig into front stage selling so you know what it is and why it's so important. And once again, we have with us the magnificent Mark Magnaca, Dynamite David Bowders, Mega Mike Kunkel, and Doug Win-Win Wyatt. Hello, guys.
Hello. Glad to be here, Jason.
Now, one advantage to the shift to virtual for many is that you don't need to go into the office or, in some cases, Congress.
Big economy sprung out from the last recession. It offers a job to anyone who wants one. During COVID-19, we must make sure that our nation's sole proprietors and the smallest of small businesses receive timely.
Will the gentleman suspend? I'm sorry, Mr. Emmer?
Yes.
Are you okay?
I am.
You're upside down, Tom.
I don't know how to fix that.
Could he turn right side?
All right, Mark. Glad to have you back, and I'm glad that you're not upside down. Can you recap for everybody what we learned in the last episode about orchestration, front stage, and backstage, and how all of that relates to sales?
Yes, happy to do that. So there were just really 3 big ideas. The first one is this notion of orchestration, and that the best sellers understand that a big part of their job is acting like an orchestra conductor. And if you think about that image in your mind, the orchestra conductor is literally orchestrating the different musicians who are playing at different periods of time and sometimes playing together. In the same way, great sellers in this virtual world understand how to play that role. They can play that role with buyers. They can play that role with subject matter experts from their own team and really help create a seamless buying experience. That was the first big idea. The second one is this notion that there's a front stage and there's a backstage. What we mean by that is front stage is whenever you are live, synchronous with the other party, whether it's on the telephone or in a virtual meeting, like a Zoom or a Teams meeting, or there's what we call backstage or asynchronous. And that's anything else, whether it's a text message, an email, a short form video, or what we call a digital sales room. Any of those things are examples of backstage that help you be more effective front stage.
Thanks, Mark. Now, dogs and kids and video filters can complicate virtual selling, but the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. So, David, can you tell us a little bit about what you believe are the advantages of virtual selling?
Well, virtual selling, as we know, is here to stay. It's here to stay for some pretty good, solid reasons. All of us have spent enough time over the years stuck in traffic, waiting for planes, sitting at gates, watching aircraft changes going on to understand that's no way to live as a professional. So quality of life is really important, work-life balance, all of those things that enable us to have a more meaningful, balanced life are accelerated by the presence of virtual technologies.
Mark, so what advantages come to mind for you, sir?
Virtual selling is more efficient, and it's more efficient in a meaningful way. I mean, if you think about it, in the course of an 8-hour day, you could literally schedule 5 to 10 meetings in the time it would take to travel someplace and do 1 meeting. And so what that does is it just opens up a whole new world of possibility of literally being able to interact with customers that might still be profitable relationships for both of you, but it didn't make sense because of the time and distance between you for you to do it virtually. So there's the cost effectiveness, there's the time effectiveness, and the reality is it's a lot easier to get people. In many cases, whether it's subject matter experts, whether it's executives, it's much easier to ask people if they could jump out of their day for a 10-minute call or maybe 15 minutes at most for them to come on and join you on a call in a way that they likely couldn't do if you required them to be there in person. And then one other thing is this notion of being able to record the call. The value of recording is really difficult to quantify until you get in the habit of doing it, because every once in a while you capture lightning in a bottle. And when that happens, somebody says something that everyone just, wow, what was that? So being able to capture that moment, to be able to share it back with your participants who were part of the meeting, or to be able to share it with someone who wasn't able to attend the meeting, now you didn't lose it. And lastly, the thing that sellers love is the ability to have a system that can record the call, transcribe the call, and make it really easy to add the notes to your CRM system so that you can remember exactly what was said on the calls. This can save a meaningful amount of time, and it's yet just another efficiency. The reality is most of us in an in-person meeting don't record the phone calls. It's very awkward in a sales call to put a recorder down and say, do you mind if I record this meeting? Whereas if you think about it, in a virtual call, it's very comfortable to say, do you mind if I record this meeting so that I can give you my full attention and I'm not having to take notes. I don't want to miss anything you have to say.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on what Mark just said. I mean, fundamentally, a lot of the core technologies here, perhaps transcription, for example, one of the best parts about it is once the sales process is over, although you could argue that selling is never really over, but once the formal sales process is over, there's going to be all kinds of folks in your own company who need to understand what were the problems that you uncovered during the sales process. What is the definition of success as your company starts to support the sale that you've now accomplished? All of those important insights, all of that important buyer intel, if you will, needs to be transmitted downstream to the teams who are actually going to solve the problem. And so when we use these virtual technologies, including transcription, what we're able to do is have a seamless flow from the buying experience into the customer experience. And that's the crux of one of the key value attributes of virtual.
Doug, anything that you would like to add to that?
Just that it's buyer-centric. We heard last episode that it's what buyers actually prefer. Buyers don't necessarily want salespeople always coming to their offices, especially if they're working from home. They definitely don't. But it's what buyers prefer from a buying standpoint. It's more efficient. They can get what they need to move forward in their buying process.
I mean, historically, if you look at a traditional sales territory, fundamentally what you had was a patch of dirt. You had a certain area geographically that you were tied to with your car, with direct flights, for example. They were all basically circumscribed radius of what you could cover. By its very nature, that produced generalists in the sales team. They had to cover the broad diversity of prospects and customers who were in that geographic radius. Once you eliminate the geographic radius as the constraint, you unlock all of the benefits that we know economically accrue to specialization. That is, you get to learn more about specific problems and specific industries and specific technologies that you have to master in order to be successful. You're no longer stuck trying to be the jack of all trades and the master of none. You can finally start to cross geographies and focus on the common problems of similar customers or similar prospects that transcend geography. And so the benefits of specialization are greater insight, greater productivity, greater ability to innovate. All of these benefits accrue to specialization. And specialization today depends on virtual.
Specialization depends on virtual, and we're saying your success depends on virtual. But some of you may disagree. You may have bought into the myth that virtual selling is inferior to face-to-face selling. And you know what we do with myths? It's time for Debunked. Mark, in your book, you say that some people believe that virtual selling is inferior to face-to-face selling. Would you like to take a crack at debunking that myth for us?
Absolutely. Look, Jason, what I can tell you is this. I think we've all had an experience where there are certain elements in a sales process and there are certain moments where there's no substitute for being in person. But what the last 2 years have taught so many people is that all moments in the sales process are not created equal. And the reality is, as an example, for a first meeting with a prospect who you've never met, all things being equal, if you have to fly 3,000 miles across the country for a first meeting on the opposite coast of where you started, versus doing a 15-minute Zoom call for discovery to ascertain whether or not there's even a product market fit for what it is that you're selling. So if you think about it, the idea that every single interaction needs to be in person is just not true. That's the first thing. The second thing that sellers sometimes forget is that it doesn't really matter what the seller wants. It really matters what the buyer wants. So the real question to debunk the myth is, in your industry, with your buyers, what do they prefer? And according to McKinsey, across 3,300 leading companies globally, 61% of them in the B2B sales realm have said that they prefer virtual selling to in-person selling. So that still means there's 39% that prefer in-person. And the beauty of this approach is not to say that one is necessarily 100% right and the other is 100% right, but rather that when you step back, you realize these are two different arrows in your quiver, and depending upon your particular customer in your particular field at a given moment in time, one of them may be better than the other.
Yeah, I think in response to what Mark just said, I mean, the 39% that we're talking about is in the context of today's mediocre performance of sales teams mastering virtual. That's got to be the high water mark of what it'll be. If you consider what's coming next with new generations of sellers who grew up in virtual world, who grew up in virtual classrooms at school during the pandemic, that's going to change. And companies who build their sales approach based on the old way of doing things are going to be rudely awakened when the buyer demographics change and their competitors elevate the experience that buyers have virtually.
It's a great point. Buyers prefer virtual. It's only going to become more mainstream. The tech will evolve, and sellers are going to get better and better and better at it. So for those reasons and everything that Mark said, we are going to declare that virtual selling is not inferior to face-to-face selling, and therefore this myth is debunked. Let's dig into the specifics of front stage selling. We've all been on so many video calls over the past couple of years. See if you've experienced any of the following.
Yeah, can you please turn your mic on? I can't hear you.
Is there an agenda for this meeting? Is everybody here? Can you see my screen?
We don't hear the video. Hey, is that your kid in the background?
Can we take a little break?
You're muted.
We can agree there's room for improvement. Mark, would you, so we're all on the same page, take a minute and give us a definition of front stage?
Yeah, sure. Front stage is everything synchronous, everything that happens either on a live telephone call or on a live virtual meeting where you're there at the same time as the other people and you're communicating back and forth.
And backstage refers to all the asynchronous interactions like emails, videos, you send articles, anything that you're going to share with the buyer that they're going to consume on their own. So Mark, in your view, what category does chat messaging fall into?
The chat would absolutely fall in backstage.
Backstage, 100%?
Yep.
Okay, because we were wondering about that. We were debating about it. And because, when I'm chatting with a customer service representative, I see those dots.
Yes, you do. It does feel like it's almost synchronous. But if you think about it, the reason you see the dots is because it's not synchronous. If it was synchronous, you wouldn't need any dots, right? And Apple and others came up with that because otherwise you'd be waiting and wondering what's happening. Did they get the message? So that's what the dots do for you. But by definition, that makes it asynchronous.
So I just lost $5. Thanks for nothing. So Mark, how do you want a salesperson to think of front stage and backstage as it relates to their sales efforts?
Well, we have a great visual that really helps summarize the way we believe you need to think about this. And we call this the micro buying experience. And if you think about it, it's almost like a timeline that starts with what happens before a live meeting. That's the backstage activities that help set the stage. Then there's what happens during the live meeting. And then there's what's happens after the live meeting. And if you go back to the theater metaphor, there are people backstage who are working the lights and they're working the sound and the curtains. They're doing everything they can to make for a great front stage experience for the people in the audience and the actors or performers who are on the stage. And then after they're done with the live performance, again, they come behind the curtain and they go backstage. So when you start thinking about that, there's things that you're doing to get ready for a virtual call before you go live, and then you're live, and then the call ends, and there's things that you're doing afterwards. That framework really goes a long way to help people to know what they're supposed to be doing at any given moment.
Mike, Mark just talked about the microbuying experience. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think so, Jason. To expand on what Mark said, in modern sales foundations, we just categorize this as effective sales meeting management. This whole before, during, after planning and dot connections across those is just really smart opportunity management and helps accomplish joint objectives with both you and your buyers, right? It's a little like that old adage, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And each orchestration is set in motion to achieve whatever the meeting objectives are, or the sales process stage objectives, or satisfying the buying process exit criteria is probably even more important. So it's really just getting the buyers what they need to move to the next stage.
So if a salesperson understands the idea of orchestration, they can make the most of backstage opportunities, which will improve their front stage interactions. Now, let's take a minute to geek out about the tools that are available to a salesperson. I'm learning new things every day as we're diving into really understanding everything that's become available. Mark, we'll start with you. Which tools are you most excited about?
Well, I'll tell you, I love this ability to create a multimedia presentation. There's a reason that television and video and the movies are so powerful. And one of the reasons is they replicate the motion and images that most of us conjure up in our brain when we think versus just words on paper. And so the ability to create and share videos, to conjure certain emotions because of the images or graphics that you use, that's something that, quite frankly, you can even do in real time in a virtual presentation that's very difficult to do in an in-person presentation. You can't be changing the PowerPoint, but as all of you know, someone says something and your ability to pull something into a virtual presentation, that's something that's unique. The next big one, Jason, is what we call the DSR, alternatively called the digital sales room or the digital solution room. And what this is a private microsite that becomes a collaboration space between a seller and a buyer. It's a place to organize all of the relevant content rather than them having to go back through 10 or 15 emails they've received from you over the period of maybe a year. This is a one-stop shop that allows you to put a curated amount of content that's just the things they really care about. It could be white papers on the topic. It could be the price quote. It could be warranties. And it can vary from sort of a high level overview for certain personality types to a lot more detail for other personality types. We're finding this to be something that after you've used it, you realize this is the way to buy. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, that ability to pull in those pre-recorded messages.
Hi, I'm Relia Smalls, the Sales Effectiveness Implementation Consultant here at Sparks IQ.
Having just a little drop-in message from a subject matter expert or CEO or an executive at your company, even having past customers or testimonials to bring the idea to life.
Salespeople are going, this is some of the best training we've ever had because we've never been focused on this.
You are literally acting like a movie director or orchestrator, pulling all of these things together, making it a richer, more compelling experience for your buyer. Now, with regards to this idea of a digital sales room or a digital solution room, that's actually a backstage technology in most cases. But we found that sellers are starting to use this tool in a front stage environment. So in the past, it was something you shared before the meeting or after the meeting as a repository of a curated set of content. But now we're seeing sellers who are actually pulling it up on screen and sending the link to the buyer so that they can pull it up on their screen as well. And in doing so, they're making this an immersive, interactive experience where in some cases they're adding content to it during the call. So that's another way to add engagement in the context of Frontstage.
So, Mike, how does the use of a DSR change your experience of Frontstage?
So, it really changes what you need to do in your voice-to-voice meetings, Jason. And in a DSR or a digital solutions room, you can provide pre-reading or pre-work before meetings. You can do post-meeting and share things afterwards. You can do summaries of conversations, decisions, open items, action items, all the stuff we recommend as part of sales meeting management. You can actually co-create agendas with your buyers for the next meeting, ask and answer questions. You're sharing content they can review on their own. So that might actually satisfy decision and exit criteria. And a really cool thing is you can see what's being viewed and shared by whom and with whom. So if you use this well, it will actually inform and make your Frontstage meetings far more productive. It also allows buyers to do what they really want to do, right? Which is some of their own research and to get smart quick so they can make better decisions.
Doug, anything that you want to add to Mike?
No, I think Mike's dead on. It helps you use the buyer's time wisely when you are front stage and meeting with them, and especially it helps you have a more credible conversation with them. To Mike's point about adding third-party content, it's establishing you to be a better front stage collaborator based on the things that you're doing when you're backstage.
David, your turn. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think if we think about the DSR as a specialized tool for addressing the unique challenges of two different aspects, then we have a really valuable resource here. Number one, we know that team selling is a reality now. We have to have specialists who understand the industries of our customers. They have to understand the different buyer personas that they face, functional roles that our buyers have across the company that's buying from us. We know that in order to be able to engage all of those people, they're not always going to be available at the same time. So we need asynchronous tools like DSRs to be able to point the right resources from the right specialists on our team to the right personas on the buying committee. And as team selling has expanded, as the buying process has evolved more and more to involve complex and frankly numerous personas and committees, the capability of the DSR to be able to feed specialized resources from experts on the sell side to personas with very specific functional needs on the buy side is a game changer.
So Mark, there are a bunch of new tools we didn't have just even a few years ago, like polling and chat and screen share, and I mean all that cool stuff that we now do pretty much regularly. Can you talk about how sales reps can make the most of those tools?
Well, all of these different tools have their purposes, and depending upon where you are in your journey towards mastery, some of these may be appropriate for you, and some of these may be things you want someone else to assist you with. But I'm going to give you a real simple example of one that has been a game changer. There are many sellers who learned how to sell using a whiteboard, and they're good at creating whiteboards. And if you've ever tried to use a whiteboard in Zoom or Teams and use your mouse to do it, it's very clunky. It's very hard to draw a straight line or a circle or anything with a mouse. So what some sellers are doing is they're logging into the Zoom call, as an example, with their iPad, separate from logging in with their computer. And then they have an app on their iPad that allows them to use a stylus. So now you take your stylus and you're able to draw the whiteboard presentation. It's coming up on the screen. You're making it interactive. And at the end, you can take a screenshot of it and then send it to your buyer. That's another example of taking some of the things that you may have been comfortable with in the in-person world and transferring them over to the virtual world and actually being more efficient than standing there in front of them.
David, do you want to add anything about these tools that we've been talking about?
Well, let's be clear. The tools and the technologies are a never-ending change process. There's always going to be a new gimmick, a new tool that comes along. The key here is to have as your North Star a commitment to greatness on the customer side with this experience. If you have that commitment, then as tools come and tools go, you'll be able to continue to adopt and adapt to the new technologies in the marketplace. But it all starts with that passionate commitment to a great customer experience. If you commit to that, the technologies will follow.
Jason, if I can add to that, David just underlined really one of the fundamental premises of this whole book. And it was those two things. First and foremost, there's a curiosity that informs a mindset. And the curiosity helps drive what I'll call this growth mindset around how can I make it a great buyer experience? You think about, imagine if someone went into a Tiffany's and they came out of Tiffany's and they put the necklace that they purchased in a brown paper bag, right? Think of the difference in that experience. And so I can tell you that, for example, when Tesla delivers a car, they actually bring red velvet ropes out and they put red velvet ropes around the car and they undo the velvet ropes to bring you in, close them. And now you're having this experience when you take the delivery of the car. It's a subtle thing, but this attention to detail underscores what David just described. And that is, you've got to actually care. If you care, you're starting to ask better questions. You ask better questions, you're thinking at a different level. And in doing so, people notice. And sometimes they can't even say what it is. They just know they like buying from you versus other people.
That's great. The tech and tools that we use to be great virtual sellers will continue to evolve. So it's extremely important that you keep up with the tech. And I'm specifically speaking to those of you watching this 5 years from now. One key to a successful Frontstage meeting is audio. So let's hear from our resident tech expert, Jeanette Abrahamson. Jeanette, let's talk tech.
Today we're going to talk about audio. Before you turn off this video, don't worry, I won't sound like this for the entire thing.
If you think sitting through that for a couple of seconds is unbearable, imagine what it feels like for people to sit through an entire meeting with someone who has bad audio. I bet your imagination doesn't have to travel very far because bad audio is everywhere. And it's one of the reasons some people have a hard time focusing on all the benefits of virtual meetings. Not only is good audio more pleasant to listen to, it's also important to make your meetings accessible. Some people may have to turn the audio up to hear what you're saying. If you have lots of background noise, that means all of that noise gets louder for them too. So now that we understand why audio matters, let's talk about what you can do to make it better. Consider getting a microphone for your virtual meetings. I got the Blue Yeti Pro, and it plugs right into my computer via USB. I just have to tell my video conferencing tool to use it. It also has several different options. This button is great if you happen to be in person with someone sitting across from you, or if you're recording an interview or a podcast. It picks up audio in both directions. I'm usually just here by myself, so I use the setting that picks up audio in one direction. If you're on your own, you'll want to select the unidirectional setting so your mic isn't picking up room noise unnecessarily. Even a great mic won't help much if it's on the other side of the room. So try to place it a foot or two away if you can. This one set me back about $150. It's a fantastic microphone, but there are more affordable options out there that will fit your budget. Oops, sorry about that. The next tip is to save your coworkers from having to say you're muted. The ability to mute your mic is fantastic, especially if you're working from home with other people. You don't necessarily want everyone hearing everything that happens behind the scenes, so muting is great. Forgetting to unmute is not so great. So just try to be mindful and unmute whenever you'd like to talk. Another reason to mute is that many of us are surrounded by noises that we may not even notice. You might be surprised by the amount of noise that comes from things like air conditioners, dehumidifiers, fans, even your fridge. If you can't turn them off or sit farther away, mute is your best friend.
Mute is your best friend. Thank you, Jeanette. Those audio tips sound great. Forgive me. I'm so sorry for that bad joke. And that's all for today. I want to thank David, Doug, Mark, and Mike for sharing their thoughts on Frontstage selling. And I want you to join us next time when we'll discuss best practices so you can provide a great Frontstage experience for all of your customers, even those who demand perfection.
You're muted. Can you see my screen? We can't hear the video. Is there an agenda for this meeting? I was thinking we could. You froze. All we see is your desktop. I've been on calls for 4 hours. Can we please take a break? Do we really need to have this meeting?
Yes.
You're muted. I'll be right back.
He'll be right back, and we'll be right back with the next episode. Bye-bye, everybody.